guys, it's time to get into our top story of the day, which is the new media versus the mainstream media. And this is something that I want to talk about, not just because the election's right around the corner, but because I've noticed very specifically how new media has been playing a role in this election cycle that it never played in any other election cycle in the past. And it really kind of started with me with this New York Times hit piece story, where basically the New York Times decided to cherry pick some right-wing YouTube content creators. I say right-wing, Tim Pool's not really what right-wing, and some of these guys aren't like super right-wing either. But because they're kind of counter narrative, they're like, calling the Democrats out on all their BS, they're lumped into right-wing. And basically the New York Times did this hit piece where you can see the title down here, Election Falsehoods Take Off on YouTube, and It Looks the Other Way. And what this was, is it was basically a hit piece that was coordinated with this liberal anti-free speech organization called Media Matters, where they basically just used crib notes from Media Matters to say like all these people are dangerous right-wing extremists who are spreading misinformation and disinformation. And this was basically a way to pressure YouTube to take these creators down running up in the final days of the election, right? And to their credit, YouTube kind of stood up and said, hey, none of these guys are violating our policies. We're not going to do this. But this is the type of thing that the New York Times in particular has been doing for a while. Like this is how the first and second adpocalypse happened, if you guys remember that, right? I think in the second adpocalypse, Steven Crowder had like some type of like disagreement with a LGBTQ influencer, and the New York Times pointed this out and pressured YouTube to take action, and it basically fucked everyone.
He called them a gay Mexican.
And they were.
But he was a gay Mexican.
Yeah. There were no lies detected in that.
No lies detected. He's literally a gay Mexican.
Yeah, literally. But what was funny about this is that in the new media period here, okay, and this is a Fox News thing, where they basically kind of talk about the far left Media Matters thing, but Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson on X both kind of tweeted about this before the article came out. And this is great. So like in Tucker's thing, the New York Times guy who's writing this article, he contacts him asking for a quote. And Tucker says, so the New York Times is working with a left-wing hate group to silence critics of the Democratic Party. Please ask yourself why you're participating in it. This is why you got into journalism? It's shameful. I hope you're filled with guilt and self-loathing for sending me a text like this. Please quote me. And then the New York Times reporter responds, thank you for the prompt response. Would you like to address any of the points or questions above? And he had like listed all the stuff that, he was going to be addressing in the article. And Tucker says, would I like to participate in your attempt to censor me? No, thanks. But I do hope that you'll quote what I wrote above and also note that I told you to fuck off, which I am now doing. Thanks. Which is the pitch perfect response to this type of thing. But Ben Shapiro also did like a big thread on this on X, because he got contacted by the New York Times as well. But he went kind of like a little bit more in depth about like, why this is dishonest and what the actual motivation behind this was. And what was really interesting to me is that, so basically new media, which is like YouTubers, podcasters, people who are outside of the network media, the people who are on the broadcast airwaves and stuff like that, they've had such a huge impact on this election cycle. And in fact, this is a direct strategy from Barron Trump, of all people. Because Barron Trump, he's a young guy. He's very tuned into YouTube and podcasts and stuff like that. No, almost Batman. Almost Batman.
Right?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about this election cycle is, so Donald Trump was never able to get an honest shake in the mainstream media. Like they would always try to, deceptively edit his interviews. They would take him out of context. They would flat out argue with him. Like Leslie Stahl on that famous 60 Minutes interview about the Hunter Biden laptop, where she's like, it's been disproven. And he's like, no, it hasn't. And they edited it to make it look like Trump was completely out of touch and didn't know what he was talking about. And with new media, what's really interesting here is that Donald Trump has embraced it, this news cycle. And with new media, they play these interviews oftentimes unedited. People get to see Trump's full response. And the crowds that watch these different podcasts and YouTube channels and live streams and stuff like that aren't the types of people who normally watch news. Like, they're kind of low information voters. They don't really care about politics or like whatever. They want to be entertained. And so like when they see Trump on these new media platforms, oftentimes it goes counter to the narrative that they've been fed by the mainstream media. And this time around, like, we've seen so many things where basically Kamala and Biden have had numerous lies exposed by, free speech on X, YouTube, all this other stuff. But the big thing to me is typically we talk about endorsements and how important endorsements can be. And on the Democrat side, you have, the Avengers just came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. Remember, down with democracy?
Down with democracy.
Hashtag down with democracy. But if you look at the people who've endorsed Trump compared to all the Hollywood elites that have endorsed Kamala, so like, here's a list, right? So we have Jake Paul, Conor McGregor, Buzz Aldrin, Drea DiMatteo from The Sopranos, Zachary Levi, Shazam himself, Tony Hinchcliffe, famous stand-up comedian, Kill Tony, adult actresses Rochelle Ryan and Amber Rose, Mel Gibson, Paula Deen, the Queen of Butter, Brett Favre, Elon Musk, Victoria Jackson, Kelsey Grammer, Jim Caviezel.
Did you just say Brett Favre?
Favre,
Yeah, he did.
whatever.
Is it Favreau?
I'm the destroyer of words, guys. I get
That
it.
hurts my heart that you just said Favre. Like,
Tell me about it. I'm from Wisconsin.
Dennis Quaid, Jason Aldean, Dana White. The list goes on and on and on.
It's Dana
right?
Witte, actually. Dana
Witte?
Witte. Yeah.
Osweepe? Okay. But also I want to give a big shout out. John Voight, Scott Baio, Dean Cain. All these guys, Hulk Hogan, 50 Cent himself has come out in favor of Trump. And it's really interesting.
Like, I don't want to be 25 cent.
Well, can I draw just a very quick dividing line between those folks and others? They didn't go to any of Diddy's freakouts.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, 50 Cent hated Diddy.
But I want to talk a little bit about like the new media that Trump has been targeting. And again, Almost Batman was the mastermind behind this marketing strategy, right? Because Barron Trump famously, like, he watches podcasts, he watches YouTube, like, and he'd go to his dad and he'd be like, "Dad, these are the guys you need to get on the shows with." So we have most famously the Joe Rogan podcast, right? Both Trump and JD Vance have been on Joe Rogan, but as Elon Musk likes to say, or I should say Jordan Peterson, the X-Men, the excellent men of like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Vivek, and Elon himself have all been on the Joe Rogan podcast. Tens of millions of views, right? I think that the Trump thing now is like upwards of like 35, 40 million views, which is absolutely insane. Like it puts to shame any other news program that he could have possibly gone on. The Undertaker from the WWE, right? Like, he was on the 6 Feet Under podcast with Kane, right? Both the Undertaker and Kane very publicly supported Donald Trump. That reaches a lot of young male WWE fans. Andrew Schultz, comic. He's like a co-host with Charlemagne the God on a different podcast. Not the type of guy you'd think would endorse Trump. He had Trump on a show. Trump won those guys over. Andrew Schultz endorsed Trump. You have Bussin' with the Boys, which is a Barstool Sports podcast. Theo Vaughn. You had Theo Vaughn, who's like the 5th biggest podcast in America right now. Like, he just talked to Trump about drug addiction and stuff like that. It didn't even touch on politics.
Right.
It was really interesting. Then you had Aiden Ross, who's like the biggest streamer on Kick. We just talked about Twitch. Aiden Ross is over on Kick. He's one of the biggest streamers over there. Like millions and millions of people watch this guy. Lex Friedman, who's the closest thing to like a nonpartisan, fact-based journalist out there. Like, he just sits there, he gives the most boring freaking interviews, but he has interesting people on his show. Like, he had Trump on there. The Nelk brothers, Dr. Phil, Dave Ramsey, Logan Paul did an entire episode of Impulsive at Mar-a-Lago with Trump. The All In podcast, who are a bunch of tech bros. Sean Ryan, Patrick Bet David, PBD. It was actually like one of the few like really good interviews that PBD's ever done, in my opinion. You have Dan Bongino, you have Tyrus. Tim Dillon had JD Vance on. That was a fantastic interview.
That was good.
JD Vance just like freaking killed it on that show. You have Tucker Carlson. You have the Elon Musk spaces that Trump did. And, famously, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, tried to launch his presidential campaign on Twitter spaces. It's a good idea that the technical wise, it didn't quite work out for him. But Trump learned from that, and he did like the biggest Twitter space ever with Elon very early on in the campaign season. Then you have like Jim Norton, who did UFC Unfiltered. Tim Pool had Trump on his show, right? And of course, Ben Shapiro also had him on his show. So like you have all these situations where not only Trump, but Trump surrogates like RFK Jr. and JD Vance and Tulsi Gabbard and all these guys go on these new media shows that reach a very particular audience, people who aren't typically political, right? Or who are low information or who don't know anything about politics. And you're seeing like more Latinos, more Black people, more youth vote, more independents, more libertarians, all shifting towards Trump because of this utilization of new media. And the mainstream media is out there like losing their fucking minds because they don't know how to compete. They can't control that narrative that new media is basically breaking through. And through the new media, all their lies and deceptions are getting exposed as well. And X is a big part of that. And this New York Times hit piece, which coordinated with the Washington Post to drop another hit piece just days later, trying to pressure YouTube to take down these very influential channels. They're scrambling to try to retain control. And I think going forward, if Trump wins this election, which I think he will, this is going to be the template that oftentimes politicians are probably going to follow. I mean, right now, Ted Cruz has his own podcast. A lot of politicians are starting their own podcast just to get their message out unfiltered in a way that the mainstream media can't, spin or control or whatever. So I wanted to have a conversation with my expert panel of nerds about new media and the advantages it has over the mainstream media and how the mainstream media is actually probably going to die or at least like see like a big decline in usage as Gen Z and Gen Alpha and all these younger generations get older and they're getting their news and stuff from new media as opposed to CBS News or ABC News or whatever. So Alan, you are in the heart of Los Angeles. You're in the entertainment industry. You deal with these people. You see this. You are a legit journalist. You work for Film Threat, which is a legit magazine, has been for a long time. So you're right in this kind of like new media versus mainstream media kind of like bubble, I would say. What's your take on this, and how do you think the mainstream media is going to try to destroy new media as a way to compete?
Yeah, I mean, the way mainstream media is going to destroy new media is to claim that they're the only true journalists, that that freedom of press only applies to the mainstream media and not to the new media streamers. That's how they're going to go after it. I mean, I'll say that, growing up my entire life, the news has always had a liberal bias to it. But to me, it was always at a bearable point where at least they made attempts to feel balanced, attempts to understand the other position and challenge it. But today, it just feels like the attacks are unbearable and the gaslighting is just insanely unbearable. And that's why I turned to new media, because I just can't watch mainstream anymore. It just feels like I'm not getting the full story. It feels like that they're propaganda for one of the parties. And what I like about new media is the fact that to have Trump sit down and have a conversation. JD Vance, I just watched the JD Vance Joe Rogan interview, and I was incredibly impressed with the guy. The way he spoke, the way the thoughtfulness. This is what you get, because on mainstream media, you're just going to get the selected clips and bits that they want to get out there. And it's, like I said, generally biased. But to watch a full interview, to see each person, look, Kamala has been doing podcasts and streams. And every time she does it, I get to know the full person who Kamala is to the point to for this person. You see her in all her glory when she does these things, and you see Trump as well, and it just makes, I just hope that this new media grows more and more, and quite frankly, that is why the mainstream media is afraid of them, because they are getting the audiences that they once had, and that they don't have the monopoly anymore. And again, I think I think the next fight for the mainstream media is to say that the First Amendment, freedom of press, only applies to them and nobody else.
But Alan, we've already seen, so it's not just in politics though, like the whole new media versus mainstream media debate. We see it in our industry too, like the entertainment industry, where it's like you guys at Film Threat, Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, Critical Drinker, all these guys are the new media. And every time Variety writes a piece defending the idiocy of Lucasfilm, every time Screen Rant comes out in favor of Disney and calls its viewers racist and sexist and misogynist and stuff like that. That is the frontline battle right there, where it's like, we have our YouTube, bubble here. Like, we're all friends. We all communicate. We all show up on each other's streams and stuff like that. But we speak the truth, right? We speak our opinion, or at least right. like we truthfully say what we think about something.
What we believe, right.
Yeah. And compare that to all the shilling and obvious fake narratives that, the mainstream press in entertainment push out there. Like this isn't just a political thing. This happens in like video game journalism, right? All these things basically come down to new media is more honest and more truthful than the established media. And what do you think are the consequences of this, where it just seems to me like the mainstream establishment media's days are numbered, but maybe I'm just looking at it from a biased perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's been numbered for a long time. Fox News still outperforms the entire mainstream media combined. It's I feel like that the mainstream media exists solely that people can talk about and rant about, and it's weird because I think it doesn't, like, Hollywood Reporter and Variety and all those guys are they're owned by the same company.
It's all Penske. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's not is the Wrap.
Yeah, and the point there is that all they're doing is quoting each other. I see it all the time where the Hollywood Reporter will say, "Well, Variety just broke this news," and it's the same company, and they'll do it vice versa. It's this sinister way of controlling what goes out to the masses, and right now I think more and more people you see are applying their critical thinking skills and listening to these guys and asking real questions. Right now, not enough of people are doing it. These low information voters, that they want to keep them low information voters, and they will do everything they can to silence the other side. Otherwise, if they hear us and they hear us talk honestly about our opinions, whether we agree or disagree with one another, the biggest threat to the mainstream media is for people to start thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
And culture, before we went live, you and I were having a conversation about, because, you are in one of the most contested counties in America, Maricopa County, where all types of weird shenanigans go on in that swing state. Yeah. Whenever election season comes up. Yeah. And one of the interesting things that we talked about was how many Trump signs that you're seeing out right now compared to like 2020 or even 2016, right? Where it was almost like it was almost dangerous to publicly have like a support for Trump out there. And what's been interesting to me is as Trump has done more and more of these long form interview podcasts that aren't edited, that are published, like with JD Vance's Joe Rogan interview, like you literally saw like the technical, like they didn't even edit out the technical difficulties they had where Joe Rogan's mic kept dropping out, right? Yeah. So like truly unedited stuff that's getting out there. And I think as Trump did more and more of these things leading up to, the final stretch of the election, because people were able to see him unfiltered, unedited, without all the spin and stuff like that, all the attacks that Kamala tried to levy against him. He's Hitler. He's literally Hitler. He's a Nazi. You know, like all this other stuff fell flat because people are like, that's not the dude I saw on Flagrant or Joe Rogan or Impulsive or like whatever. So what do you think is the effect that Trump's new media strategy has had on this election?
Actually, I think you can see it. You actually pointed out something quite tangible. Yard signs. Yard signs are going up. And as those appearances, I don't know if this correlates, probably not, but I've seen more and more signs in my area going up supporting Trump in an area where, you know, most of the people just kind of gave up on, announcing who they were voting for. We still have a few people that are looking towards a more, controlled future. But in my area, it's wide with Trump signs. It's amazing to me. People are unabashedly unafraid at this point, and that's amazing. As far as the new media goes, though, the new media is destroying the old media, and I think that's basically largely to blame. And I think if Barron Trump was the strategist, the strategist, as we should say,
Strategist.
sorry, I use that from an old Rush Limbaugh days.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, but
that was an old SNL joke too with George Bush.
That was Anchorman.
But
no, it's SNL. You're right.
Strategery and all the other things he used to say were brilliant. So, but anyway, back to it. I think that that's actually bearing out. People don't consume news or information the same way the old media wants you to anymore. And the fact that it's more easy to reach people in a way. I mean, I can listen to Mr. Kadish, all day long on my my phone or whatever, wherever I happen to be in the house, just by tuning into one of these shows. And the fact that Trump went out there, took full advantage of this in a way nobody else had. And again, as always, Kamala had to come along and then copy. But it's been extraordinary. And I think it's easier to explain and to point to people the unfiltered, the uncollated, the uncurated information that normally gets out to people in the news media, to actually see what he says just full, raw, no garbage, as you were mentioning.
Unfiltered.
Unfiltered. And I think that's really going to be the difference here for a lot of people. And I don't think we can ever go back. I think this is the beginning of the new election cycle. And I think going forward, probably for the rest of my life, these people are going to come and have real conversations with people, and they're not going to get questions they expect, which is something I love, right? I'm not going to pre-prep you, a specific candidate, with all the things I'm going to ask you. That's not the point here. I'm going to ask you all of the cool stuff, like what was it like to be the first day? To be a first day president. Well, you never were in politics before. How did this feel? Those kinds of questions. Not a lot of other people are going to get out there and ask that question. Theo Vaughn's going to ask his different questions. That knucklehead that's going to fight Tyson. He went out and pontificated elsewhere. Yeah. I mean, you've got, and I assure you that as people become familiar with the fact that this is going to bring eyeballs, when you're able to have these bulletproof conversations with these politicians, this will change everything if it hasn't already. And I'm going to say one last thing, because you didn't allow me to do this, but I have to. Musk is going to take care of Media Matters, dude. That's April 2025, baby. Then we don't have to worry about them anymore.
Yeah. Odin, I want to throw this to you because out of everyone on the panel, you're probably the one who is most regularly in contact with America's youth, like the young people. And the young people out there, I can remember when I was in like grade school, I didn't care about politics. When I was in high school, I kind of knew what my parents thought about politics, but I didn't really pay attention. It wasn't until I got into college where I really started kind of paying attention to that type of thing. But, Democrats have traditionally done very well with like the youth vote because kids are stupid, right? But one of the interesting things about like the whole new media campaign that Trump went on is you have people who speak directly to a young audience. Like, culture just called him a knucklehead, but Jake Paul, he has a huge following of young people. His brother Logan Paul, he has a big following of young people. Aiden Ross, it's like all young people. Yeah. All streamers, it's all gamers, it's all these young men who probably don't normally bother themselves with politics, and yet when these big influencers start talking about it and start showing them interviews with like the president or like whatever, these kids, like, they get exposed to that type of thing, and then they start to form opinions on it. So I wanted to get your take on, how do you think the new media campaign for this election has affected America's youth? Do you think it's actually permeated into that crowd of kids that maybe like aren't political, but like they're like, like, I don't know much about Trump, but I like him now because I saw him interviewed on Impulsive or something like that?
To a degree, right? Because there's different levels of youth and youth engagement. There's some that do watch like the podcast, so get into Joe Rogan, watch those episodes, really enjoy those conversations that are had. But there's also a lot, especially if they're a little bit younger, like in the maybe 13 to 16 age demographic, where they're much more into like the short form content. So the way it's impacted them, it's obviously kids of non-voting age, but the way that it's impacted them is much more about memes and meme culture. I remember it was earlier in the year, and all of a sudden, randomly, two guys in one of the classes I was teaching just started going back and forth, being like, "It's gonna be huge, it's gonna be big." Like they started doing Trump impressions, and so it was like clearly they, like it didn't come across as their family is a part of this political party, and so now they're just reiterating it. It's like, no, clearly they've saw some videos and they just think they're hilarious, probably like comics that do different impersonations, including one of Trump. So I think that the meme culture has had a huge impact, and so I don't know how much impact it has on the youth now as far as that specific demographic, because that'll probably impact them in the next cycle. Though the other question is, of course, what happens after Trump is no longer a part of the political discourse and discussion, because no one, it seems, can really drive people the same way. But that's where the brilliance in choosing someone like a JD Vance is because what he's doing is choosing someone who actually is closer to that age, to the younger, generations, who can actually do well on a Joe Rogan, who can understand that space quite a bit, and therefore will be able to be probably best suited to maybe dive further into it. And going back to what I think it was, I think it may have been what Culture was saying, but something I'm really looking forward to is I cannot wait for the presidential politics to move away from that corporate structure as we've kind of seen it doing. Like having those interviews where it's long form, not that formal CNN, NBC type interview where it's clearly edited down and you really can't trust what you're seeing. Instead, you have just people who are authentic, people that you trust in some degree. Again, whether you should trust them or not is obviously up to the mind. But just having that, much more likely to get good information from them, much more likely for them to make a big mistake. And it actually is like, oh, now you have to actually figure out on your feet how you're going to pick up from this mistake and explain yourself. I think is going to be a huge net benefit to our political discourse, because we have relied way too long. It's basically how 2020 happened, where someone could literally from their basement do nothing and still get elected because of the power of the mainstream system. And, now we're seeing that being broken down quite a bit. And so I love seeing it happen.
Yeah, and I'll get to you in a second, Culture. But one of those interesting things about this, after people see like a 3-hour Trump interview or like whatever, is a lot of people have been bringing up the idea of more Lincoln Douglas style debates, where basically you have a live stream where you have the two candidates sit down, and instead of having moderators there, instead of having time limits, you just like videotape them having a discussion where they're actually just debating each other. And in a way that can be way more honest and informative than these bullshit, like ABC, CBS debates where you have the moderators literally like, playing favorites. You have fact checks that are actually like lies. And you have people like, trying to communicate what it is they believe and think is important within the confines of like 60-second sound bites, right? Like I feel like new media is the perfect kind of platform for something like that. What were you going to say, Culture?
Oh, wow. Nothing now. You jumped all over a great idea. I'd rather explore that, because I think you're right. A Lincoln Douglas style debate, the fact that both people have to speak extemporaneously from a background that they brought into the conversation with, and to have somebody be able to fact check them, that's fascinating. Why don't you do that? You do that. You do that, man.
Well, I want to ask Tom, because Tom, one of the interesting things about this new media strategy is that it's not just Trump, because a lot of people already have kind of like their thoughts about Trump. They either like him or hate him. So like if they hate him, they're probably not going to watch these things. If they don't know anything about him, they might choose to watch it or not. But the big thing is that his surrogates have been all over new media, like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, JD Vance, Elon Musk, all these guys are going and doing the same strategy, but they're reaching more people. Like just RFK Jr. alone has been able to bring in so many libertarians and independents into Trump's camp that it could be the deciding factor in the election. And so it's not just about the presidential candidates doing new media and shirking the mainstream media. It's also about their surrogates. So like, what do you think about that strategy?
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Trump, look, I'm kind of one of these people that kind of made their mind up this time around. I did not vote in the last election, admittedly, because I just at that point wasn't sure that either candidate, in my opinion, was worth a crap. But after the last 4 years, I've seen the difference. And a lot of the things that you're talking about kind of helped me make that decision. Seeing other people talk about Trump, learning how to speak Trump really helps. Learning how to use X and other places to find my news, because you can't trust the media. And like I was saying at the beginning of the show, like after this week, if you're any person who has any brain cells and you can't start to see the way the media is spinning this stuff to the point where like Trump literally has a case against like CNN and MSNBC right now where he could sue the shit out of them. The way that they spun this whole thing with what's her face, the war hawk, I just forgot her name.
Liz Cheney.
Liz Cheney. Yeah, with that whole thing, just that alone, just that one thing, okay? The way that they spun that, from my understanding of going to school for this stuff, that is one of the, I can't even, I don't even know how somebody didn't stop them. Because the way they were spinning that was like, are you serious right now? Like, are you seriously trying to say that he said that when even anybody who can listen to the actual quote, unless you literally chop off the beginning of it and really try to present it in that way to somebody, no sane person is going to think that, right? Like, even when you got Bill Maher coming out and saying, yeah, no, he didn't really mean that, you guys. That was really kind of stupid. It's like, no, it's not just stupid. This is the kind of crap that got him shot at. Right, and this is what kind of turned me at the end. I'm like, you know what? It was one thing when they just haven't been friendly towards him because they have a bias. But when they are clearly just flat out lying, making shit up, misrepresenting, to the point where this is election interference, in my opinion. Like, we've gotten so far past the point I've ever seen anything in my lifetime that if, you know what? All those things that they're scared about Trump doing in office, he should do half of them. Just to show them how stupid they're being and the laws they're breaking, because they keep trying to come at him with every little thing they can. And it's like, do you realize the laws that have been broken in the last few years here are just insane? And yet they just let him do it. Just let it go on. You know, it's like, okay, you know what? I was serious earlier when I said, yeah, I hope to gosh, if Trump gets into office, knock on wood, that basically he just comes in and pulls a Elon and just fires everybody he can. Like, literally across the board.
Yeah.
Because at this point, that's the only way you're going to drain the swamp.
Just clear it
It's
out.
a literally, what do you do here situation scenario then? Because at that point, then you rehire back the people who actually did do work, right? Like, that's what Elon did. But as far as, like, the reach you got to reach the kids, right? My kid, he's been somebody who's always been on the side of Trump, and, you know, he's somebody who follows a lot of different things to where I think kids are smart enough, right? We've had X now that's been free now basically for, you know, however long now since Elon bought it. And I think that's the big difference coming into this election. And I think a lot of people have noticed how big of a difference it was compared to last few times where, you know, we were bombarded with stuff on Facebook and X and other, you know, outlets like that, to where these kids, you know, like they've pretty much abandoned Facebook. You know, Facebook is the new MySpace because it's what your grandma uses, according to them, right? So,
right,
like,
yeah.
if it's not something that's on Instagram, X, or TikTok, or whatever it is that they're using that I have no idea what it is.
Tick face.
Yeah, the tick face thing or whatever, you know, tictogram as I call it. No, like I think it's a good thing, and kids will listen more. And I think it's a bigger deal because I think the biggest chasm between Trump and people right now, and those who just don't want to listen to him because they just have that thing about it, is if you could just listen, because like you guys said, if you sit there and listen to him in long form, he makes sense. Now, is he the best at expressing his ideas? No. But once you start to listen to what he's saying and how he breaks it down and how he thinks, Like that Joe Rogan interview, I had already made my decision and cast my vote by that point. But if I hadn't, that would have definitely been the clincher, because at that point I'm like, I can see now why this guy is good at making deals and talking to people, and why all these people from The View and stuff actually liked him originally, and it just shows you the disingenuousness of all the people who are turning on him now, who loved him and kissed his ass before, right?
Right.
You know, we're looking at you, Whoopi Goldberg, and all these other people that are trying to pretend that it never happened, right? Well, it's because he is a very personable person. You could tell on the Joe Rogan interview, they sat there for 3 hours. Do you realize they really only talked about Trump, if you're lucky, for about 45 minutes to an hour? Most of it was him just turning it back on Joe. So I'm sure that's what he does in any given situation with somebody, and that's how he gets to know people, plus makes them feel more comfortable, so he can go in and make the deal then, right? Because he's looking at being a president is just that. I got to go to all these different places and make deals with all these people and not get screwed. And when he looks at not getting screwed, he's looking at America not getting screwed, not just him personally, because he has no personal stake in this outside of being an American. And if you can't think of it in that simplistic of terms, then I guess I don't know what else to tell you at this point. But Kamala, I mean, look, I think the youth is smart. They can see how discombobulated she is, how disconnected she is. And just because you can create a bunch of celebrities who, let's be real, don't know how to make life choices anyway, coming out for her. I mean, somebody did a mic drop. I can't remember the guy. I wish I could give him credit, but I shared it on my Twitter, and this is the last I'll say about it. He did the ultimate mic drop when he's like, you got Beyonce out there parading her around and you know, and all these people, and J-Lo. Well, J-Lo, you know, she's saying that Trump is supposed to be this like thing against, you know, we're supposed to worry about him and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, you didn't seem to warn us about Diddy though.
Nope.
Right? You knew about him for years.
Nope.
And I know I fucked up how it was said, but he did an ultimate mic drop on that.
She doesn't make
shit.
great decisions, right?
Well, it wasn't even about the decisions. It's like, so you're coming out and we're supposed to believe you that Trump is this horrible person and the warnings you're giving us about Trump, but you didn't bother to come out and warn us about Diddy?
Right.
I mean, it's those kind of things that you got to remember with some of these people. All these people are in the same camps. They hide all the same things. Trump knows a lot of these people. So that's what they're scared of too, right? Like that's the other thing. There's a disconnection between them and certain politicians. But Trump, these people used to chum up with him. Don't think he doesn't know who the worst of these people are.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he does. That's why he also threatened, and this is something that you're not going to get the same promise from Kamala of releasing the Jeffrey info.
Epstein
well,
list.
And I think the Diddler list would be a similar thing, because that's where a lot of people I don't think are off on that either.
I want to get the future Tim Pool Brian's take on this, because him and his brother Shane are going to be dominating the news space very quickly.
Oh, I don't know about that.
But Brian, you know, one of the biggest issues with the mainstream media is credibility. Like they have just blatantly been lying for like almost 8 years about Trump, right? And they don't seem to be catching on to the fact that people are starting to notice, and people are turning to alternatives because they don't trust the news that they're being given. Like you have a situation where like Trump was almost shot. Bullets were flying, like pictures caught bullets whizzing by his head, right?
Right.
And like, if that had been like a Democrat, we'd still be hearing about it in the news cycle. They buried that story.
JFK.
Yeah. They buried that story within like a week.
Yep.
Right. And then when the second assassination attempt happened, they were like, "Oh, nothing to see here." They take every little thing that he says completely out of context. The Liz Cheney, or as someone in the chat said, the Warhawk Tua moment.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Basically, there's a credibility issue with the mainstream media where you have 60 Minutes, selectively editing. Like they literally took a answer that Kamala gave to a different question and posed it as the answer to a question that her answer was just nonsensical to.
Right.
And going even further than that, we just had the recent issue with President Biden calling every Donald Trump supporter garbage. The sitting president of the United States called half of America garbage because of who they preferred to vote for. And within minutes, you had the media trying to spin that with an imaginary apostrophe. And for those of you who don't know grammar, I'm sure Odin can kind of like chime in on this. When you have an apostrophe at the end of a certain term, it becomes a possessive term, where it's basically like you're not saying, "Oh, it's not plural." Like he didn't mean like garbage, like all of Americans or all of his supporters are garbage. He's saying that his supporters' position apostrophe s position is garbage or like whatever. And like they literally changed the White House transcript to try to push this narrative, right?
Even
so,
the
like-
stenographers, even the
Yeah.
stenographers are like, no, like this is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's highly illegal to do
Yeah.
that, by the way, as well.
But
the-
it was his stutter that
Yeah,
you couldn't
yeah,
put that
exa-
apostrophe in that stutter.
Exactly. So like there's a lot of examples out there of just how dishonest the media has been, and CNN has shot its credibility. You even have Anna and Schenk from the Young
Yeah.
Turks.
Hesperian, yeah.
Yeah, who are basically like I never thought I'd say that the Young Turks are actually making sense, but like they've come out, they're just like common sense. Like these liberal policies are dangerous. These people are lying, and we're not going to play along with it. So like I got to give them a little bit of respect. They're still crazy, but like I got to give them a little bit of respect. But even they are so disenfranchised with the leftist narratives out there that they're coming around to common sense solutions. And I think a lot of that has to do with like, the middle of the ground, like, former Democrats, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, all these guys who are now in Trump's camp. So Brian, I want to get your take on this. How does new media keep exposing the lies and, just flat out deceptions of the mainstream media? And what impact is that going to have going forward?
Well, there's video evidence now, right? Like, where we live in an age where Twitter is actually free for once. And so that's a pretty huge platform for things to not get suppressed. Video, audio, et cetera, to not be suppressed. I think that where new media, whatever it's called, alt media, our media, this media, where we excel is, or where it excels, is able to take video evidence from 6 years ago and video evidence from now and show how the mainstream media is continually gaslighting its viewers and and the American people. A big example for me was watching Anthony Fauci say, I never said anything about 6-foot rules. I never pushed for a mask mandate. I know they're not very effective. That's what he said like 3 months ago. And then some YouTuber just went back 2 years, grabbed the video of him saying, I suggested mask mandates. I told the president we need a 6-foot rule, and literally just owned him with his own words in his own video. What makes me nuts about the mainstream media is that they act like we can't just go look it up. Like the information just disappeared. They say things like, she was never the border czar. That same exact person a year ago saying she's now been appointed the border czar. Hello? At what point do people just get over it? And they're being exposed by us, by YouTubers, by influencers, by the new media, because it's easy to do. It's an easy own to just take that person's video from CNN or The View or whatever, something they did 2 years ago, take that exact video that's been archived and it's streaming on Disney Plus or whatever it's at, take that, their own words, and just show them that they're lying. Show people. And it only works on a free internet. It only works because Elon bought Twitter. And now that Elon bought Twitter, YouTube and Facebook and other places are like, well, we got to lighten up on this censorship thing because we're competing. Thank God he bought Twitter. Imagine if there was just this monopoly of big tech that didn't have to actually worry about freedom of speech and about showing reality. If he had not bought Twitter, I don't think YouTube would be playing the game it's playing this year. Him buying Twitter honestly made other social media networks that were actively censoring for the government, as confessed by Mark Zuckerberg recently. It made them, it put them on notice where they have to do things better because there's a competitor out there that's doing better. So I think new media, I think that the reason it's going to take over, and I think that the reason it's going to push out mainstream media is because mainstream media can't compete. They can't compete because they're owned by big pharma, they're owned by governments, they're owned by contracts, and all of that money that is pushed out, like it's a loss leader. They're not making money, but big pharma props them up, and the government props them up, and these big left wing institutions prop them up because they want to keep the influence. But you know what? That influence is waning. And people realize that the influence is waning. So now, what's Kamala doing? She's going out to influencers on TikTok and Instagram and saying $25,000 to put a reel up on your, and this is a fact, $25,000 to put a reel up. Do it for me. How many other influencers, like they're figuring it out that mainstream media doesn't have the pull that new media does. I mean, come on, dude. You think The View or any of those shows that Kamala is going on is getting even a fraction of the views that Rogan got? Yet, what did Kamala say? Joe Rogan is irrelevant. He needs me. What? Are you insane?
Also, YouTube suppressing the Joe Rogan interview.
Yeah.
Like shadow banning it. And that's one of the dangers of like having a government disinformation and misinformation office. You guys remember that bullshit?
Oh, God.
Or like the Biden administration literally tried to create a government position to determine what's truth and what's disinformation, misinformation.
Creepy Poppins.
Yep. I mean, dangerous stuff. Okay.
Look, one last thing, because I want to add to what Brian said, and it's kind of important as far as I'm concerned. We need to put the original Smith-Mundt Act back in place, the unamended version, which means the U.S. government cannot lie to its own people. It cannot push propaganda in the United States against Americans. That they would be stuck in a hamstrung position because they would be violating federal law if anybody even sniffed that they were doing it, if that were in place. That all got disassembled under Obama. So you really have a huge problem there. So you get that along with the old media being replaced and unfunded by pharmaceuticals. You have a much better world to live in.